So, welcome back again to the Dear Global Leader podcast. We are in the part 2 of the episode with Lise Brinog. So, she's the certified coach, executive coach, and coach of ICF organization. You're also a board member of this. We'll talk about it in a second. And in the part 1, we discuss a bit about what does it mean to be coachable. And now I wanted that we discuss a bit about perspective is key. You mentioned something in part 1 that was about when you're a good leader, you're also a good coach, which means that leaders sees what others may miss. And this is what we'll talk about. So I wanted first maybe to ask you, what is the line that you draw between healthy adaptation and, being coached too much and maybe losing yourself into the process?
Being coached too much. I'm not even sure that can happen.
I can give you an example.
Yeah,
Maybe
please do.
maybe it's not an example of coaching, but I feel it happens a lot in mentorship. When you take a mentor, it's usually someone that you look for. And it's someone that is such a role model that what they will tell you, you will want to adapt. And sometimes when you are too open to feedback, maybe too coachable, you want to apply what people tells you. But then there is a thin line where sometimes you feel yourself, but this is who I am. Like I would not want to change that. And I want to understand if through the coaching is maybe a bit different, the relationship, and how do you make this a bit more healthy for people to understand where feedback is good to be taken, but just to be taken, and one to be implemented actually.
Well, it's so helpful that you provided that example, and now you'll understand why I was like, I'm not sure this can
Yeah.
happen, because this is indeed the biggest distinction between coaching and mentoring. So if I were to simplify, mentoring is often someone who's more experienced than you, who will tell you, hey, this is how I did it, or maybe this is how a colleague of them did it. I think that may work for you too. And then you try to do it the way they did it. And you're quite right. Sometimes you can lose yourself because you think, oh, well, this is the way people do it, so I have to do it this way, even if it doesn't feel quite right for you.
Yeah.
Coaching is different in the sense that sometimes, yes, sometimes a coach may share their experience, but this will always be done either because the client explicitly requested and say, oh, Lise, I know you led your own company as well. How did you do it? And then I would explicitly check, do you really want to hear my experience? So you have, it's contracted. The person is like, yes, yes. Then I would share my experience, but then I would follow up with a question of, so what does this mean for you? Not saying you need to imply my thing, 100%, but what is it in my experience that you can take that resonates, that feels like, yeah, that's good for me? And what is it that you can discard because it's certainly not the way you want to go? So that's if coaching comes if advice comes in coaching, it will always be still with the person being able to dig out their own solutions. So that's how do I explain that difference?
It's much more neutral. I feel that
Yeah.
one is a bit more, like I share my experience and then it becomes the generality. And one is more like, this is the generality. If you want, I give you one example that is not representative of the generality.
Yes, and I should add to that what we're talking about is going away from the pure coaching definition of the International Coaching Federation. So the International Coaching Federation really stands for puristic coaching, and they will tell you that it's mostly sharing questions, mostly sharing your observations, what you see, like, you talk a lot about this, but you never mention that, like holding the mirror, if you want. Sometimes, if explicitly agreed and contracted for, sharing your own insight and experience, but again, within very strict boundaries. So it will make, I don't know, 2% of the session, maybe this. But in a pure coaching session, you may have none of the advice sharing. And so it's really always thinking that the client actually knows the answers. The client knows what they need. And I'll give you an example. Really interesting. I talk about it on my own podcast. It's a friend of mine, an entrepreneur, and she was in a startup incubator led by Microsoft. And so they
Mhm.
were like, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you pitch. And here's the round. And here are the VC investors and the angel investors.
Mhm.
And she and her co founder felt like, yeah, that doesn't quite work for us. And so
Mhm.
they did something completely different. They sent letters to potential investors whom they had chosen on the internet. And so, no
Mhm.
usual pitch, just a letter with a little, some press articles about them,
Mhm.
handwritten, etc. And everyone was telling them, this is unprofessional, this is not how you do
Okay.
it. And they trusted their gut. They literally trusted themselves. And within the batch of the startup batch that they were in, they were the first to raise the first million. So that shows you that very often there is this established way of how things are being done that
Mhm.
would be shared in a mentoring type situation.
Mhm.
Oh, this is how things are usually being done.
Yeah.
And then there's this super creative way that no one ever dreamt of that
Mhm.
you can come up with yourself when you give yourself
Yeah.
the chance. That's what coaching is about. Coaching is about, okay, how would you do it? Like, what's your
Mhm.
thing? And then crazy stuff like, the letters will come up, and it may very well be highly successful. Sometimes it
Mhm.
will fail, fine, then you learn from it and you try again. But that's really this trust that sometimes breaking all the rules and doing it your way will
Mm.
actually be much more successful.
Super. And because you just mentioned the International Coaching Federation, we mentioned multiple times you're also part of the board. I guess you are also discussing maybe the future of leadership skills. And I wonder what is maybe your view, or if you can share the one of the board of ICF, of what would be interesting leadership skills to master for the future.
Yeah. So I am the chair of the ICF General Enterprise Board. The question comes a little bit early because literally we're meeting next week for a full week in Vienna,
We'll do a part
and
three then.
we'll have a lot of discussions there. And so I'll have a much more informed view of, the what the board as an entity is thinking then. However, in terms of the leadership skills, what we see a lot is what I talked about in our first part as well, that coaching skills, yes, for some people, like for me,
Mm,
it is a profession. It's our full-time
mm,
job. But I like to think of it like, cooking skills or like
mhm,
mathematics. Like you have professional cooks, and then you have people like you and I who cook dinner
mhm.
every day, and we do cook, but we're not professional cooks.
Yeah.
And it's the same with mathematicians. You have mathematicians who do math all day, but you and I also do math when, we
Mm,
buy something and we think about the price
mm,
and we compute. Like, so it's this, the coaching skills, they, for me and for ICF more broadly, it's not just the profession, it's also a very useful skill set for our human to human interactions more broadly.
mm.
And so
Yeah.
we have a part of ICF looks at coaching in organizations. So how organizations can use coaching skills in their programs for their leaders, etc. They also, the foundation, the ICF Foundation, looks at how coaching can support charities to be more effective and
Mhm.
have a better impact in the world. So you have various parts of the ICF that looks at coaching beyond the professional coaches who have made it their profession.
Yeah, super. Because the reason why also I created this podcast is because I personally strongly believe that in the next years, the cross-cultural awareness or understanding should be part of the leadership skills, because we didn't touch upon into part one, but this leadership team, they are not, if you're an international company, from the same people with the same gender. I mean, we are in a new world, now there should be balanced gender, balanced age, balance everything. And when you have all of this complexity together, usually it comes back to culture, not only nationality, but the way we see the world. And I sense that maybe it's linked to coaching skills, but I strongly believe that this is something we need to better be trained on, because the
Yeah.
world is just going more and more in that direction. It's just not happening that you're working with people like you anymore. I don't know,
Yeah.
what is your view on it?
Well, I fully agree with you on that, that the ability to understand that my perspective is my perspective, and
Yeah.
that even though you and I may look at the same thing, let's imagine you and I are outside and we look at a tree, you will see something else than I do,
Yeah.
even though we think we're seeing the same thing. And so being really aware of that, my favorite tool here is Byron Katie's The Work. And she has a book, she has a website, she has a podcast, and it's really about flipping. So when you say, oh, he's being difficult, to flip it
Mm,
to I'm being difficult,
mm-hmm,
really see, okay, what
mm-hmm,
if the opposite was true? Like, how real is my
mm-hmm,
perception actually? And to play with it and to be like, maybe the opposite is true. And then, okay, how real is the opposite? And to realize that actually a lot of stuff is relative. And as you were saying, it's becoming multi-layered, because
yeah.
yes, there are dimensions of gender, sexual orientation, culture, but also a lot of people
Generation.
come from mixed cultures as well. So
Yeah.
then you carry 2 or 3 or 4 cultural
Yeah.
legacies. Then you have the country you work in. So even if it's a
Mm,
multinational organization, they're headquartered in a specific country, that
yes.
will also influence their culture. And then within an organization, you have the culture of individual teams. So, your
Yeah.
legal team may have a completely different culture than the marketing team, for example, or the sales team. And so that's to have that ability to understand, aha, this person is not bad per se. They're not a
Mm-hmm,
blocker per se. They're not wanting to be annoying per se. They just come with a different lens, with a different frame. And when you
yeah.
try to then understand their lens and their frame, then suddenly the situation may look very, very different. And you're like,
Mm-hmm,
yeah, I hadn't considered it from that perspective. And I think that is extremely enriching and reduces conflicts, reduces friction, enhances understanding, and makes work more fun, honestly, when
yeah.
we get there.
I was just reflecting right now because this is a switch I think I realized I was doing when, sometimes you're in a bad situation. I don't know, you have the impression you have a bad boss, or maybe you have a bad relationship with a colleague. Sudden, Suddenly, usually people just say like, he's a bad
Mm.
colleague, or he's, negative, 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 not complimentary. But I know that I usually say, this person is not a bad person, because usually you have a relationship with this person. You know that the person is not bad. But in the professional setup, I always say, like, we're not a good fit.
Mhm.
I will not mention to other people like negative on other people. I'll just say we are a bad fit. And I think this is a good example of what you were saying, because it's about perspective. Because for other people, this might be the perfect fit. And maybe for your ambitions, your ways of working, whatsoever, maybe you're not compatible, or maybe this person is in a different maturity of his or her career and is focusing on something different than you. So then the value doesn't add up. You were talking about value or identity a bit before. And this is something that is guiding me a lot, to just not judge the people. As you were saying, maybe someone comes in with a bad mood. If you just meet this person that day, you will have a bad impression. But is this person always like that? Maybe it's always about perspective. You need to give all the chances. And you need also, I believe, to not provide a bad impression to others. You were saying like, oh, I took this certification because a trusted person gave me a good recommendation. But I think it can happen all the way around. You have the trust in one person. If this person says something bad about someone, maybe you have a bad impression about this person. So I think it's
Absolutely.
also, when you are in the professional setup, it's also a good skills to have, to keep, your, praise in public, and don't say, if you have anything good to say, you don't say it. At least this is the way I approach things. And I see that a lot of people maybe don't approach it the same way. I don't know
Well,
how it
it's
relates. I
very
am unpacked
respectful.
a lot of stuff. Yeah.
No, I really like that the way you describe, because it shows that you have awareness as to how your negative judgment of someone may impact someone else's judgment of that very same person. And given that it's all about perspective and it's all relative, it's not a very human thing to do. So you'd rather stay neutral. And I would actually add, we are not a good fit for now for this
For now,
project,
yes. For yeah, yeah. For yet, yeah.
because things do evolve. And I remember one colleague, who shouted at me in the workplace. And I alerted him to that. And I said, did you realize that you just shouted at me? And he was so concerned. And he was under a lot of stress privately.
Mhm.
I obviously didn't know, but obviously the shouting
Mm.
was. And
Mm.
rather than say, this guy is stupid and I'll never ever interact with him again,
Yeah.
I just said, hey, do you realize? Because it's not very nice to be at the receiving end of it. And we became best friends. We collaborated on so many things afterwards because we had
Mhm.
that chance to really clash big time, and then
Yeah.
to talk it out and to be like, okay, I really didn't want to be like that. I am so sorry. And then to realize actually we're pretty aligned on what we want. His style
Mhm.
of delivery wasn't the best, but
Yeah.
we managed to find a really fruitful kind of way forward.
Yeah. And I think I was also mentioning that in the perspective of like the title of this part two, which is having also your own perspective at yourself. Because
Yeah.
this is what I've learned also with like, me navigating a bit more the cross-cultural understanding is that I evolve in the Nordic. I'm not from the Nordics. And so I know that I come across a certain way culturally because I'm more bubbly, I'm more, intense and so on. So this is why I just say that it's okay to also take it, understand who you are and just say
Yes.
it's not a good fit now because I know like some effect I can do on some people just being me. And so I think it's also you need to take into account that you're not perfect and that some people don't understand who you are the same way of other people. And it's not that everybody are dicks, like you also sometimes in certain context, maybe things don't match and this is okay.
Yeah, what is central for me in what you share here is the notion of choice. We were talking about authenticity before, and it's this notion of, okay, let's imagine you have a culture that clashes with the prevalent culture that you operate in now. Then you have the choice of, do you want to adapt, tone yourself down a little
Totally.
bit
Yeah.
so that you fit in? Or maybe today, this project, this particular
Mm.
time, you don't want to adapt and you're going to be the bubbly,
Yeah.
and as long as it is a conscious choice, then you're good because you
Mhm.
know what you do, why you're doing it. You have that situational awareness. You may have a particular intention behind why you're choosing
Mm.
to be in the particular way. And what's dangerous is if people are more on autopilot and unreflected, and then
Yeah.
that can cause quite a lot of friction. And for the perspective, what I also find interesting is to think about it across time. So, past, present,
Yeah.
future, and to think of it across levels like individual, team, organization. Because depending on whether you are in a one-on-one setting or a group setting or an organization setting or even society,
Mm.
then you may want to behave and come across in different
Totally.
ways, again, by choice. So another example, I had a client who at an external meeting with her boss being present,
Hmm.
contradicted the boss openly in front of
Ah,
external guests. And so
okay.
that client was neurodivergent. So I had to tell them this is not okay. Now,
Hmm.
just being very blunt and saying, look, in an organization that has the structure and the hierarchy that yours has,
Hmm.
you do not contradict your boss in front of external guests. You can do that in a one-on-one setting or in
Hmm.
a smaller setting within the organization when there are
Yeah.
no external guests present, because otherwise your boss loses face. And so
Yeah.
sometimes some people need to learn also ways of behaving. They may not be aware, or maybe they may not have the capacity to read social codes and social norms, or they may
Hmm.
come from a different context where this is absolutely okay. So it's
Yeah.
always also not judging people, but trying to understand where are you coming from and what is leading to
Mm.
that behavior. They're not necessarily a moron. It's just maybe that they maybe never had that situation before and didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah, totally. And you were mentioning a bit some, some frictions and consequences. And maybe a question that I had was like, why do you think that some people get in your coaching almost too late? If someone calls
Mm,
for them, it's almost a bit too late. And
yeah.
how can you flip the situation? Like, can you come? to make them realize, the perspective area, to tell them like, look, we are there where we are, but like, do you want to go back on the right track, and how do you flip that?
Yeah.
And do they understand they have maybe waited a bit too long to
So,
ask for help?
yeah, a lot of people come too late. And I literally researched this because I asked myself, how come that the pain has to be so severe,
Yes.
for
Yes.
people to then come? Why can't people come at the point of desire, vision, aspiration when there's no pain
Mm.
yet? And
Yeah,
then,
and there's
but
inspiration. We are building.
exactly. And there's
Yeah.
a lot of research, both in the clinical setting for pain management and illnesses, etc., and depression and mental kind of disorders, and in some other settings as well. And the findings are all the same. Somehow our pain pathways, if you want, they are stronger and they prompt us more
Yes.
into action than the kind of nice, oh, wouldn't it be cool if kind of
Mm.
pathways. So I guess with the knowledge and the understanding we have right now that this is pure biology. This is how things are. Now,
Yeah.
I don't dwell in the past. So I don't like if someone comes to me, I will never tell them, oh, you should have come to me 2 years
Mm.
earlier. Because
Uh,
how is that helping? It's not
yeah.
helping at all, right? So it's like, okay, they're coming now. So let's see what we
Mm-hmm.
can do now. So I've never kind of, sometimes it's more if someone approaches me, I see they need coaching. I know they would benefit and yet they don't sign up. And
Mm-hmm.
I recommend, sometimes price is an issue, fine. Then I recommend other
Mm.
coaches. They still don't sign up, even though those other coaches are really, really
Mm.
good and absolutely affordable. So I'm like, oh, what a pity. And at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I know I need to let go. It's their life,
Yeah.
it's their trajectory.
You're
At
not
some point, the
responsible.
pain will be a lot more intense and then they'll come.
Mm.
Okay, I would love to be able to help at an earlier point sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just not how our biology works, at least not for the majority of persons. Some people do come at an,
Mm-hmm.
preemptively,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the minority.
But I see a bit this difference of mindset also in the corporate world, because so I'm a business developer and key account manager, and I can see that sometimes we discuss some manners on the markets, and some people always want to discuss the past. They want to discuss, oh, but we were doing that, and we were so good when we were doing that. I wish we could have this product again. I wish, la la la. And then some others, they understand, okay, look, this is done, discussion closed, like we need to move forward. Do you want that I help you on something I cannot help you with because decision is closed, we don't have budget, not have resource, we have zero vision and zero plan to go
Mm.
there? Or there is an opportunity here and you want that we go there? And sometimes I see that you have some people, and I don't think it depends on culture or function, but really mindset. Some people are more looking toward the future and they are more sensitive to, okay, you embark me in a journey, I'm going. And some, they are a bit more, they love the memories part, they
Mm.
love what was comforting in the past. And
Mm.
sometimes it's a lot, I don't know if it's coaching, but a lot of, I call it messaging of the organization, to let them see, hey, we need to grieve what was there, we need to
Yeah.
go to the future, right? And
And you
I
mentioned
don't know if you have
grief.
advices. Yeah.
Well, I think grief is the word. And obviously it's linked to pace. And that's been my experience in organizational change as well. There's some
Mm-hmm.
people, and I see you are in that camp. I would count myself in that camp too. When I was working in big organizations, and there's a new way of doing things, I was like,
You're the
yes, cool,
promoter.
show me,
Yes,
like I'm
I'm the
in.
same.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm going. And then I had other colleagues who were not at all like this, really dragging their feet.
Mm.
And it took me some time to understand that they were not wanting to be difficult. They just needed longer to grieve and
Mm-hmm.
to just say goodbye to this beautiful product that they had,
Mm.
and the vision they had for this product and how successful it could have been,
Yeah.
etc. And sometimes, I mean, we do have to say, sometimes some decisions are mistakes. And so maybe those
Mm-hmm.
people speaking up and grieving the product and say, oh, this could have been so,
Mm.
they do very often, they do have a point. There is something that has been missed in the organizational process, and they point to it. So when I work in organizations now as an external person, I always wonder, so when you work systemically, what people say is not necessarily about them, it's about the system. So if you were the one grieving the product, I wouldn't make it about you. And I would say, oh, Tiffen, she's always looking at the past. I would be extremely curious about what have we missed as an organization that now makes you speak up? And is there anything in this old thing that you're grieving that is worthwhile preserving and possibly taking forward in whatever new process, new product we have? And maybe because sometimes it's a very easy fix. Sometimes it's just a small tweak to the new thing that will make it fly. But very often there's a lot of impatience towards those people who voice that. And it's like, oh, shut up. I mean, get on with it already. We're moving on. And so then you lose out on this nugget that is there and that they're speaking up. And to give you an example, there was one organization, it wasn't me working in it, it was a supervisor of mine. And I had this one person always speaking up, and everyone was fed up. Like, oh, here he goes again, right? So then they let him go. Or he goes, I don't remember. At the point is that person leaves the organization. A few weeks later, another person from the team starts taking up this position and voicing this thing.
The same
So exactly. So it's not about the person. It's something that needs to be seen or witnessed within the system, whether it's a team, whether it's an organization, and it will always find a way to get expressed. And so it's really important to listen to it. And for grief, sometimes if it's just the personal grief of the person, then it's just important I found sometimes just sitting with them and being like, yeah, that was cool, wasn't it? And then I'm like, yeah, it was. And that's it. And you can move on. It's just taking the split second
acknowledgement.
to acknowledge
it's acknowledgement.
it.
Yeah. It's like people wants to be seen, and then they've been
Yes.
heard, and now, okay, I can hear
Yes.
you because you heard me.
Yes.
Maybe
It's as
then
simple as that.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
think Tiffen, wanting to be seen and wanting to be heard, this is essentially what happens in a coaching session. It's slowing down enough for the person you're with to be fully seen and to be fully heard. And when that happens to me, when I have a good coach coaching me, I get goosebumps, because I feel seen and heard. And this is such a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, you feel understood. Maybe last question before the short questions at the end. You work a lot with transition. I think it's really interesting, transition, personal, professional. And I wonder, what do you feel that usually people underestimate when we are in these breakthrough moments?
Possibly, and this is linked to the grief we talked about, I think is the question of identity. Because the way people have defined themselves shifts and changes in those transitions. And that sometimes can be quite painful, depending on what you transition to or the identity you were clinging to before. And obviously on how much you like to cling to your identity versus how fluid you are with your definition of identity. So that is a big one for many people with whom I work.
So let go of this identity then, because they're going to another one.
Yeah.
I think it's really accurate because I see it also a lot, with colleagues that are retiring, and these people that were the expert in the company. And I feel in the Nordic, especially, this is something I became aware of because, where I come from in France, people retired, and maybe it's because I come from a worker background, but, it's like retiring. Okay, fine, we close the chapter. But people in Denmark, they always start by part-time. You feel that they don't want to let go, like in the Nordics. And even afterwards, they became personal consultant of the company. It's like, it seems that they have a 10 years period where they are trying to grieve, or I don't know, it's my own perception where they are still the expert, and somehow we continue to make them believe that the company cannot run without them. But look, we already arrive at the end of the episode. I have just three fired up questions. You don't need to spend a long time to answer them. The first one is like, is there something you learn early on of your career that you feel you still use today?
Yes, the fact that you don't control. It takes a bit longer to explain, possibly, but we think we control the world and how things are going. We don't. And
Mm-hmm.
when you realize that, it doesn't mean that you will stop planning, but you approach life and work in a completely different way.
Super. The second question I'm usually asking every guest is, do you have an advice for, emerging leaders? It can also work for global leaders, that a bit further in their career, but also younger in their career.
Yeah. You know what? I was preparing for another interview I have later today, and I was reminded that as a student, I had a gap year, an Erasmus year at University
Mm-hmm.
College London. And they had a program where it was probably 3, 4 months, where every week you would go to a session and you'd figure out, okay, what is important to me in my life right now?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to
Mm-hmm.
do? You would make goals and then you would figure out,
Awareness.
okay, how can I do this? And they would keep you accountable. And in a way, that was my first encounter with coaching, if you want, right? In a group setting with a little program running through. And I think that it was so important and became a habit for me, thanks to
Mm-hmm.
that encounter as a student of figuring out what's important to me as
Mm-hmm.
a person, and then, okay, if that is important, how do I get there? And then mapping
Mm-hmm.
out, little steps and consistently implementing it. And that is honestly something that I think works for every leader. I remember doing
Mm-hmm.
this when I joined my organization, being like, okay, where would I like to work? Oh, I'd love
Mm-hmm.
to be a banker. And I was with economists. So I was like, how do I switch from economist to banker? And I
Mm-hmm.
figured that out. And then I did the switch. And then, at some point I was like, oh, banking is cool. I really like that. I think it was one of the most impactful parts of the organization. But then I was curious about how do you change an organization? I was like, oh, I'd love to
Mm-hmm.
learn that. So poof, I went to, advise the president on the change program. So it's really figuring out what is it that really lights you up? What is it
Mm-hmm.
that really interests you that you would
Mm-hmm.
look at in your holidays as well? If you look
Yeah,
at
yeah.
my
If
book
you were not,
lists,
if you were
yeah,
not paid, or and you would still
exactly.
do it. Yeah, I
Exactly.
agree.
That's exactly it. And then you figure out a way to get there.
Super. Last question. I tend to say that usually it's a personal question, but let's say egoistic question, but can be for the rest. I'm an avid reader. I love nonfiction. So I always ask if you have a good book recommendation. It doesn't need to be on the coaching itself. It's maybe a book that you love to gift to some people, or some book that really resonated with you and that you want to share with the audience. But for sure, I will read it.
Mm. So it's funny. My head was going to, a podcast that is not a book, but that I
No, you
absolutely
can
love.
you can also propose.
Okay,
Yes,
I'll
if
share
you,
two then,
yeah.
because you mentioned something that I love to gift to people. And actually, there is a book called The Gift by Edith Egger, who is
Okay.
a Holocaust survivor and then became a psychotherapist. And she's well into
Ah,
her
yeah.
90s. She lives in the US and she started writing, I think, in her 90s. And so
Yeah,
that book I
I heard
find
about it.
is, oh, yeah, it has immense wisdom. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
from someone who has had a life like her, and is extremely easy to read, actionable, no jargon,
Mm-hmm.
super easy to apply to
Mm-hmm.
your life. So that's why I usually recommend that one, and I gift it very frequently. I have a stack
Mm-hmm.
of it right
Yeah.
next to me. And the podcast is another one that I also recommend very frequently. It's called Waking Up, and
Okay.
it's an app, and it is by Sam Harris. And what I love about that one is that it's not just him sharing his
Mm-hmm.
views of the world, but he invites a lot of other people, other practitioners, So
Mm-hmm.
it's centered around understanding how our mind works. So you'll
Mm-hmm.
have Buddhist practitioners and Zen people and people who do all sorts of, various traditions. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
argue a lot about their view of the world. And I love that because again, we're back to perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
It invites you to look at various perspectives and to play with it. And it
Yes.
doesn't tell you that,
It
the
expands.
Taoist school is better than this school, but
Yeah.
it really expands your perception of your own mind and as a result also of the world.
Super. I love it. I will check this out. So thank you again so much, Lise. So I redirect the auditor on your LinkedIn. I know you spend also time in the nature and talk to us during your talk. So if people wants to hear more about your wisdom, they can follow you on LinkedIn, and you also have your website for your coaching advice. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiffany. It was a pleasure.